Yeah, I think we need to start taking personal responsibility and be accountable for our own life. It's easy to say, well, my investment banker told me to buy the stock versus like make your own decisions. Or it's easy to say, my doctor told me to take these meds versus understand like the ramifications of taking those meds, maybe over a lifetime that you can never get off of them, for instance.
There's a lot of people who have a discussion around the idea of the victim mentality versus taking ownership. And the idea of the victim is they always find somebody else who is the reason why they're in their situation. They always find it's either external, it's the government, it's the environment. And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, the Mentoring podcast. Today we've got Christian Espinosa, Blue Goat Cyber. My kid loves to go into the shower and do goat screaming. So, he would be really excited about this this podcast, my friend.
Awesome. We may have to have it record your kids goat screaming and we can use it for our own podcast trailer or something.
That's right. Make it
I have to hear it first. I've never heard it.
Yeah. Goat screaming is just one of those weird things. And I don't understand. Like he's got this little, like it's obviously a thing because there's this little thing that you bought at the dollar store or whatever that you press it and it makes the goat scream. And, but obviously that's not what you know about. What you know about is how to stop people screaming like a goat scream when we talk about cybersecurity. Why did you choose, by the way, the blue goat? What was the reasoning behind that?
I climb mountains and like I'm a mountaineer. I've done 2 of the 7 summits and I always see goats on mountains. They're always trying to get to the next level. You've probably seen goats on the side of cliffs. Like it's almost impossible, you think, to get up there. So they're very persistent, very resilient, and a little bit stubborn. And I think those are good qualities for a business. And those are qualities that I embrace as well. And I chose blue because when I am climbing mountains, the blue sky against like snow-covered peaks is very calming and just peaceful.
I love that. Goats are always trying to get up and keep on going up. You always see they're always on a perch somewhere. So I love that idea that it's that diving into that mountaineer. But the one thing that you took out of mountaineering and some of the other things like skydiving and the other things that you've done is I think you were quoted saying the only certainty is uncertainty. It's not about avoiding risks altogether, but understanding it and having a strategy in place. Just like cybersecurity, managing risks start with hiring the right people and being proactive rather than reactive. That's from the smartest people in the room. And so, you've taken a lot of risks personally and professionally. You did skydiving. You also had some serious risks with your personal medical journey.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the biggest misconception people have about managing risk, life, cybersecurity, or otherwise?
I think the biggest misconception about managing risk is people think that you can eliminate all risk. You cannot eliminate all risk. You can get it to an acceptable level. And there are things you can do to get it to the level where you might feel comfortable. Because people ask me all the time, like about skydiving, they think it's like reckless sometimes. But there are things you can do to mitigate the risk of skydiving, such as, have a reserve parachute, wear a helmet in case somebody hits you in the air, be well trained, jump at the right altitude, jump with the right people, jump at the right drop zone, understand like how to land and how to manipulate your parachute, have a backup altimeter. So there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate the risk, so it's not as reckless as people think. And I think what keeps people away from activities is they want to eliminate all the risk, and that's not possible. You have to have a risk appetite and get the risk to an acceptable level that is in alignment with your appetite.
A lot of people, when they're making a decision, they also look at risk in a funny way because they seem to always believe that the status quo maintains the lowest level of risk, where in actual fact, considering the alternative, actually getting into action and doing something other than the status quo can actually get you to a better position than maintaining it. That not doing something doesn't actually reduce your risk.
Depends what your goals are. If you don't do anything and go with the status quo, then you're going to be just like the status quo. I mean, if that's what you're seeking, I think most people, I would imagine, don't want to be the status quo because to me, that's kind of boring.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, for when you're getting into situations like the skydiving and you're doing that mental preparedness for high risk activities, like for me, it's jujitsu. Those are the things that I love doing. What do you do to be able to get yourself mentally prepared for that?
I make sure I am in the right mindset and I feel like giving a scenario, I can respond to it appropriately. Like with mountaineering, for instance, same thing. You have to be trained. There's things you can do to mitigate the risk. On Mount Elbrus in Russia, I made a misstep and my crampons like went through the snow and I started sliding down the mountain, like and accelerating pretty fast, like a 45-degree angle. But I was well trained, so I was able to turn over, do a self arrest, and stop my descent so I didn't die. But I think of those scenarios in advance and try to plan for like a situation that might arise and make sure I'm comfortable with that situation. I chose not to climb Mount Denali, for instance, because I didn't feel I had adequate time to train. I was trying to tie my knots with my gloves on and trying to get prepared, but I didn't feel I was prepared enough. And I know people that have lost fingers and ears and noses from frostbite on that mountain. So I, look at the scenarios and, like I said, it's not reckless. It's about managing the risk to an acceptable level.
I used to scuba dive a lot of the times, and people would freak out that that's, again, reckless and high risk. And again, it just went down to where's the redundancies that you can benefit from, where's the avoidance that you can benefit from, where's the systems and models that you can follow. And when you start putting a lot of those things into play, it's actually pretty low risk. The things that are probably most risky are things like in our city, it's like driving down the highway in the city. That's probably more risky than scuba diving.
I agree. I used to scuba dive, and you can dive with a buddy. You can practice how to breathe from their regulator. If you run out of air, you can be well trained. You can have your gauge, your computer to tell you how much air you have left, and dive at the right depth. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate the risk. And I agree. I think driving down the road, a highway in traffic, is probably more risky than scuba diving, and we don't
Yep.
even think about that.
Yeah, because it becomes in a sort of our automatic response. And I think a lot of times when we look at how people respond to situations where they're comfortable, they just assume there's no risk. And that's usually where the highest liability happens, where they don't have that state of preparedness and readiness when those things happen. When you look at things like, when you look at your business, you're really in the cybersecurity business, specifically around medical devices and devices like pacemakers and that sort of thing. There's a lot of devices out there that are actually really vulnerable to cyber attacks. And these are the things we never think. I never even thought about this until you and I had a conversation like,
Mm.
somebody's going to do a cyber attack on a pacemaker. And then we were talking about Dick Cheney's pacemaker being deactivated for security reasons. And, what's your advice for people in those situations? Like, how do they know that they're safe and how do they know that they got the right thing going?
I think we need to take agency over our lives, and if we're going to have an implantable, for instance, make sure you understand what's being put inside you and the risk associated with it. It's not just all cybersecurity risk, but there's other risk. A lot of time we just rely on other people, like the doctor, some expert, quote expert, and listen to them. But I think it's important to take agency and ownership of your own life and do your own research. Nobody cares about your life as much as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Agency is a really interesting thing. I own a mortgage business and I'm in the real estate business. We talk about agency and fiduciary a lot
Mm-hmm.
and around the idea of when you take agency for somebody, you're acting on behalf of them and you have this fiduciary duty that's either implied or contracted. And I think people don't really take that seriously. And then the idea is when you're operating without that agency or fiduciary and you're operating independently, when are you actually, taking that fiduciary almost for yourself, that you're actually taking
Mm-hmm.
charge of your decisions and not just, well, the system told me to do this, so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I think we need to start taking personal responsibility and be accountable for our own life. It's easy to say, well, my investment banker told me to buy the stock versus like make your own decisions. Or it's easy to say, my doctor told me to take these meds versus understand like the ramifications of taking those meds, maybe over a lifetime that you can never get off of them, for instance.
there's a lot of people who have a discussion around the idea of the victim mentality versus taking ownership. And the idea of the victim is they always find somebody else who is the reason why they're in their situation. They always find it's either external, it's the government, it's the environment, it's the high inflation, it's the, whatever it is, it's something else. And when you start talking about this taking agency, it's really talking about taking ownership. And I think Jocko Willink talks a lot about that, is that extreme ownership, and saying, if I can own everything around me, I can control everything. What's your thoughts on ownership and agency, and how can somebody move from that victim mindset to that ownership and agency mindset?
I would ask, if I had a victim mindset or life is not working out the way I want it to be, I would ask myself, if I keep doing the same thing, am I going to get a different result? Most people just expect something new to happen, but it's not going to happen unless you take ownership of your life and become a better version of yourself. You have to become more to attract more. You can't just chase things down and think they're going to happen without evolving. And if you're a victim or you have that mindset, you're probably surrounding yourself by people that have the same mindset. I would suggest you find different friends, because it's easy to commiserate with the same kind of
Mm.
people that have the same mindset. So find friends that are striving for things that you want to go after, and they will help elevate you.
Yeah, Jim Rohn says, show me the 5 closest people to you and I'll show you your future. And I'm a firm believer in that. And
Me too.
I'm also a firm believer is not being the smartest person in the room. And, if you could surround yourself with a lot of people who are doing the things that you want to go to, not the things you want to go from, you're going to head in the direction that you really, really need to make happen in your life.
Yes, and it's uncomfortable to do that. I remember the first time I went to this networking event called the Genius Network. There's all these entrepreneurs. You had to have a business released over $1 million. Half these people have written books. Half of them were great public speakers. Half of them were, quote, influencers. So I went there and I felt like I didn't belong, but it forced me to elevate my game. After that, I decided I'm going to write a book. If these people can write a book, why can't I write a book? If they can, build a personal brand, why can't I build a personal brand? So being in that situation where I was not the smartest person in the room or the most, quote, successful, forced me to evaluate myself and think, well, how come, what's holding me back from being like these people?
Mm. Yeah, it's so true. I think a lot of times, that change needs to happen in order to achieve fulfillment in your life. And I think a lot of people, they go for maybe a short-term happiness, not a long-term fulfillment. And when you say things are difficult, change is often difficult. I mean, if you look at I was talking the other day about enthalpy, is the change of state from one to another requires, significant amount of energy than
Mm-hmm.
just going up, 1 degree. And so when people are looking at that huge amount of shift, there's got to be something that pushes them through that shift. What do you see that moment if somebody's making that pivot? A lot of people are driven by pain, some are driven
Mm-hmm.
by opportunity, but how do they get it so that they actually just get into action?
That's a tough one. I agree. Most people are driven by pain, not pleasure. Pain is the motivator. So unfortunately, people have to get to a situation where it's so painful that they are forced to change. And from the outside, I've coached people and I lead people. You can easily see what's going on with somebody, and you can try to advise them or coach them, but often they just disregard it until, like I said, it gets so painful they have to do something. And I wish there's a way to change that, but I think is traditional human behavior unless you've done a lot of work on yourself and a lot of personal development, a lot of growth.
So when you've gone through, I mean, you've gone through some major things when you had, major problems health wise, and you had to go through, obviously that was a huge pivot that you needed to make in your life. And that was, I wouldn't say necessarily pain driven, but certainly not, that was life threatening, really is what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look later in life and you look at the decisions that you're making today and some of the pivots that you're making today. They might not necessarily be at the same level of pain. They're more on the higher level of, I guess, the Maslow's hierarchy is what you might say, of decision making. Um, what made your change happen back then intrinsically, and what's driving you today to make decisions?
Are you referring to when I had the blood clots?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I had 6 blood clots. I almost died, and I was told I couldn't do pretty much everything that I had previously been doing. I couldn't run triathlon. I couldn't train. I couldn't get on an airplane and fly. I couldn't, sit in even in a hot tub. I just had to take it easy, and I'm not someone that likes to take it easy.
Mhm.
I had to take it easy and take blood thinners and sit around. So that put me in a pretty. It kind of started off as I was grateful to be alive, but then shortly after that, I got depressed and I started feeling caged, like the world was closing in, and I'm like, I'm grateful to be alive, but at the same time, this is not the life I want to live. So I'm a believer in that agency of my life and not listening to what doctors say. I mean, I'll take their advice, but ultimately it's my decision. And a life of blood thinners and just sitting around was not what I wanted. So I remember one day I was looking at the bottle of blood thinners and I just like threw it across the room. I'm like, screw it. I'm not taking these anymore. I went and got every single blood test possible. I got a Doppler ultrasound on my leg to make sure there were no more clots that could break off. And I started doing like NAD therapy and stem cells and other things just to reclaim my health. And after I made that decision, it was interesting because I felt super trapped and caged. When I made that decision to like get rid of the blood thinners and reclaim my life and make decisions for myself, I felt inspired and I felt more charged and just wanted to go for things. And after that, I started Blue Goat Cyber. I did a half Ironman triathlon and I felt like I reclaimed my life. I wasn't just sitting around.
Yeah, you were at that point where the doctors had told you you weren't able to fly, you weren't able to do anything physically stressful, you weren't able to travel at all. And how much travel have you done since that point?
A lot. I've traveled. I mean, I've been to quite a few countries. I've probably flown, I don't know, 300,000 miles since then, maybe more. And I've been to like 75, maybe almost 80 countries now. So, being told I couldn't do the things I want to do, I like to do, uh, and accepting a life that was not feeling in alignment with who I um, was that was painful for me. I thought maybe that was a pain that was a driver because I didn't feel I was living up to my purpose and living up to who I am and living up to my potential.
Yeah, and the idea of before, if you would have carried on that trajectory, again, maintain that status quo, imagine where your life would have been today versus where your life is now. And by you taking that agency of saying, I'm not going to accept, the decisions that others are making. I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to invest in the research. I'm going to get second, third, fifth, 12th opinions on things, and then actually take ownership of the outcomes. Really puts you in a position that, as you said, you've got the Ironman done. You've got a great business going. You've really gotten to the situation that you're in control.
Yes, and it started with that single decision not to take the blood thinners anymore, and really the decision to reclaim my health and put life back in my own hands. And that's a tough decision for a lot of people. It took me a long time to get there because, like I said, I was grateful to be alive, but I started feeling caged. I'm not someone that, like I said, likes to sit around and watch reruns of Yellowstone, which may add to my depression. I realize Yellowstone is not the most happy
I tried watching
series.
Yellowstone. A lot of people talk about it. Unfortunately, I just would always fall asleep. I'm generally, when the TV goes on, my eyes go closed. It
Yeah.
frustrates my wife to no end. Like, oh, let's watch a movie. And she's like, that's great. And she's like, you always fall asleep. I'm like, it's the perfect time for me to fall asleep. It's great. I love it. I love falling asleep to movies. But, because the rest of my life is all about, it's active. I'm up at 4:45 in the morning
Yeah.
and, I'm doing jujitsu. My first start of the day is I choke somebody in the morning. Right. And it's a beautiful thing.
Maybe I should sign up for that.
Don't say maybe, say definitely. Remember how you felt after the blood thinners were gone? That's how you're
Yes.
going to feel once you get into jiu-jitsu.
All right.
Jiu-jitsu to me is one of the most interesting martial arts to get into and interesting things to do. It's kind of like mountain climbing in the sense is you're always trying to solve a riddle.
Hmm.
It's really just a form of chess, a physical form of chess. And it's just a dynamic form of chess. and you get a lot of joy out of it. You make some really great relationships out of it because it's a very social environment, and it's very physical and is a very mental environment. So I will shamelessly plug jiu-jitsu for you.
You're also talking about Brazilian. Is there like
Brazilian
different
jiu-jitsu,
styles,
yeah.
or Brazilian's the main one you recommend?
Brazilian is the one that I do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I train under Hensel Gracie through a school up here in Canada with Pat Goolgan. So it's
Okay.
great. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, man. I've been doing it for about 11 years. So, and I will do it till I fall over. Yeah.
All right. You got me convinced.
Beautiful, beautiful. The invite for the gym local will be in the mail.
Perfect.
Always be selling, guys. Always be selling. And so the thing is really what we talk a lot about in what you're doing is innovation, right? When we really think about your business, it's innovative. When we think about your health and how you did that pivot, that's innovative. I mean, you could have just stuck with the norm. You innovated. And I think in an episode podcast you're on, you said in cybersecurity, if you're not innovating, you're behind. The same applies to life. The moment you stop pushing boundaries, you're already following back. And then you dovetail that into the idea of the blue ocean strategy, which you've talked about a few times. How does this fit into your approach to risk management in cybersecurity specifically?
Well, in business, my first cybersecurity business, it's kind of like Field of Dreams, a movie. I thought I'll build a business. Everybody needs cybersecurity, and I'll just have endless clients. It didn't work that way because I had a diluted message that didn't resonate or land with hardly anybody because I was trying to sell to everybody. So now with my company, I've de-risked it a little bit by having the blue ocean strategy. We've niched it down to medical device cybersecurity. So our target are medical device manufacturers that have a specific need to get a device cleared by the FDA or the equivalent in Europe or any other countries. So they can't sell their device unless it is cleared, which has cybersecurity requirements. So that's a big driver. And I am a believer in supporting this industry as well because I mentioned those blood clots. I may not be here if a portable Doppler ultrasound medical device did not diagnose those blood clots or find them pretty quickly. So I've de-risked my business by niching it down, and this is contrary to what a lot of people think about when they first start a business because you're like focusing it on one specific target audience, and you constantly think, well, what about this? What about that? What if somebody else comes to me? And it's counterintuitive, but it's what you need to do in my opinion, to achieve more success. And then once you master one niche, you can definitely go after another one and scale your business that way.
There was a guy, Pete Vargas, that was doing a presentation on how to speak in front of large audiences. And he talked about the idea that when you're speaking to that large audience, you're actually not indeed speaking to the large audience if you truly want to be successful. What you want to do is have that message that rings solely true to that percentage of the audience that really you can impact. And not because you're not going to hit everybody. There's going to be people there who are just there because it's a time away from their kids. There's going to be people there because, they didn't know where else to go and that, they're at a conference that this is the only one that they could get into. And then you're going to have the people there because their message really speaks to them, and every word they're just waiting till the next word drops. And when you're looking at that idea of really honing in on that very specific thing, you can really reach the audience that you can serve in the most impactful way. And they're just ready to do business with you instantly. I mean, I couldn't imagine that, somebody who's doing a medical devices company wouldn't look to somebody who just specifically focus on the specific elements of medical devices rather than, go into the Walmart of the cybersecurity space. It seems to me that the specialist is who you'd be looking for.
Yeah, we just had a discovery call last night, and the prospect had spoken with other, quote, cybersecurity companies. They said they could do the stuff required for medical devices, but they really didn't have any idea of what was required. And then they spoke with us, and we knew exactly what they had to do on their end to get it approved. We knew exactly what FDA requires. We know exactly what the testing involves. Our team is well versed in it. And they were like, wow, you guys are a breath of fresh air. I thought all these other companies would not have a clear picture of what we need done. So we'll probably get some business out of that. call because we are niche down and we solve a specific problem for them.
Now, you said you had a previous cybersecurity business, and that one's obviously previous means in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and you have this one today. What was the transition? How did that occur?
I sold that business, Alpine Security, in 2020 to a now publicly traded company. It was a mistake. I sold it for stock, and the stock went from $5 down to 10 cents. So I didn't come out as good as I thought I would. But sometimes you got to go through these motions and these tribulations to learn. You can read about them all you want, but until you go through it, sometimes the lesson doesn't go in your head. It doesn't. You don't embody it.
Yeah.
So after I sold that company, I worked for the parent company for a while. And then I left the parent company so I could sell the stock, because I couldn't sell the stock when I was part of the parent company because all these kind of continuous made up blackout periods. And then, then I had that ordeal with the blood clots. I did some real estate for a while. And after I reclaimed my health and took an agency over my life, I developed the confidence to start a new cybersecurity business because, like I mentioned, I was depressed and didn't have a lot of confidence. That single decision, gave me confidence in all aspects of my life again. Health, wealth, relationships. And it's amazing. Like, I think life is a culmination of decisions. And often if you're trying to meet that status quo and not make a decision, your life is going to be pretty mundane. And I always think about, when I'm on my deathbed, am I going to have regrets? I've read a lot of books about people on their deathbed, and almost everybody has regrets. I didn't ask that girl out. I didn't start a business. I didn't quit that job. I didn't do this. I didn't move to my favorite destination, whatever it is. And my filter in life is if I'm on my deathbed, if I die tomorrow, would I have regrets? And my answer is no. And I always want my answer to be no. So I'm making decisions, I think about that.
I love that. And I think in the smartest person in the room, you said, I realized I was the one limiting myself. The story I was telling myself is that I couldn't do certain things. Once I changed the narrative, everything else followed. And I think that's something that people really need to resonate with. And I see I. And you really, again, it goes back to that whole concept of agency, and really took that to heart and really rewrote your story. Especially fatal blood clot. Some people would take that and just sit there. And I had a neighbor once who had that happen. He retired. He had the blood clots, and every day he would just go sit in his driveway. The garage door would be open, and he would sit in the driveway, and you'd leave, and you come back, and he just sat there because he didn't know what to do. And then it was about 9 months later he died. And I look at that. Then I look at your story is, then you go to a half marathon, you start a business, you're flying all over the place. He could have rewrote his story, and maybe he didn't realize that he was the one just limiting himself because he had just taken the status quo.
100%. And the reality is, I may have ended up dying if I didn't change my story, because that is not the life I wanted to live. I didn't feel like waking up in the morning. It's just like that guy is sitting in his driveway every day. That doesn't seem like a very meaningful life, right? Just to exist, to me, is not what life is about.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference. Yeah, there's a huge difference between living a life with purpose and living a life. And I think when you're living a life with purpose, that gives you, there's a lot of studies, I believe, around the idea that when somebody has purpose, they will actually live longer than somebody who does not have purpose. And because they have something that they have to be here for. And so because they have to be here for something, that drives them to get pushed physically, mentally, spiritually through the things they need to do because they have a duty of responsibility.
I agree. And that purpose doesn't have to be something internal. It could also be like your family. You want to support your family, or you want to see your family success. A lot of people are actually driven more by not letting somebody else down or by helping somebody else than themselves. And that's a good way to get, if you are depressed, to get out of depression, is to go help somebody else, because it takes the focus off of your problems onto somebody else's problems. And you're talking about the story we tell ourselves. One of my books I'm almost done with is about the story we tell ourselves and how to change that story, because we get trapped in our own stories. We tell ourselves we're not good enough. We tell ourselves, or someone that doesn't believe in divorce, and then like we stay married for 30 years in a crappy marriage because of this silly story we made up. So my book is about how to change that story, and I think it's important to understand we all have a story, and we constantly just reinforce it, but we have the power, if we take ownership, to change that story.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of listeners that are listening right now who are looking at their current situation, and they do feel stuck. It could be careers, relationships, finances, personal life, their health. What would you tell them is the first step to change the element of the story they don't like?
First step is to make a decision in a different direction than you currently do. If you're stuck and you're not happy with where you are, make a different decision. Like an example, and I talk to a lot of people about this. If you feel like you don't have the job you want, or you want to start a business, but every day you watch 4 hours of television, a simple decision would be, maybe I'll watch 3 hours of television today, and I'll spend an hour watching YouTube videos on how to build the business that I think I want to build. And then maybe like a month later, you spend 2 hours doing that. And these are the things I do because we don't realize that simple decisions such as that can have a major impact. We tend to get frustrated because we overestimate what we can do in a short amount of time, like a year, but we grossly underestimate what we can do in 3 to 5 years if we make those decisions and make incremental improvements.
Well, I mean, if it's the whole idea, if you improved 1% every day, that's 365% by the end of the year. If you just look at the math on revenue in a business, that's a significant number, and that's a small change. And so the idea is that all these small little pivots, it's like when you talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, sometimes it's a very small little angle that make a massive amount of difference, whether a sweep or a takedown or something that's going to work. And it's just a micro change that makes that happen.
I like that phrase, micro change. Yeah, just a small change. It doesn't have to be a major thing.
No.
Even like, I know people like are resistant to go to the gym because they also like have this story in their head, like, oh, I gotta put on my shoes, I gotta get my clothes together, I gotta drive to the gym, I gotta do this, I gotta work out for 40 minutes. You just gotta change that story and maybe just go there for 10 minutes, or maybe do some push-ups at home, or buy a yoga mat, and then you don't even have to drive to the gym. You can find a way that is easier to make the change. Also, there's always alternatives. And I think if you ask yourself, what are 3 other things I could do to achieve this objective versus what's one other thing, it forces you to think a little bit differently as well.
Yeah. And I think to me, it's when people always focus on the easier way of doing things, my thoughts always are around of, it's not the process. In our business, when we're talking about marketing strategies, we always say, date the process, marry the result. And so the idea is the process itself isn't what you should be focusing on. It should be the result of that process. And sometimes that result, is, the major result is a year from now. Like, as you say, I think it's, you don't, most people overestimate what they get done in a year, and they underestimate what they can done in 5. And it's because that result in 5 years seems massive, but they forget to celebrate those small successes that happen every day. The idea, I went to the gym, celebrate that. I was able to lift 3 pounds more, not 10 pounds more, 3 pounds more. I was able to do 1 rep more. Whatever it is to celebrate that small moment, because those little celebrations are going to feed your discipline to keep you disciplined so you can get to that 5-year result.
I agree, and I'm horrible at celebrating those small moments. Even though I've written books about it, and I try to be congruent with my beliefs. I always think, okay, we made $2 million. We got to get to $5 million. So what's the next thing we could do? So I'm very mindful of that, and I try to step back and think, this is pretty major what I just did or what my team did, and it does require some celebration or acknowledgement.
Well, a lot of hyper successful people are really inherently malcontent. And they're always slightly malcontent because the status quo just never is enough, because they always want the next thing. Well, if they always want the next thing, they're not happy with where they are today. There's a slight degree of malcontent. And so for them, it's especially important, so they don't get burnout, to really celebrate those moments. Because if they don't, that malcontent, if it takes a little bit longer to get in that journey, it can really go to a really bad spot.
I agree. And there's always another level, right? With life, there's always another peer group, another like mastermind level, another revenue level, uh, another business to acquire, business to start. So yeah, this is something I'm always looking for the next level, but I periodically look at my journey and look at where I was like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it was a lot further backwards than I am today. So I think that's an important thing to do periodically, to
Yeah.
acknowledge how far you've come, not
Yep.
just how much further you got to go.
It's a tough thing for people who are hyper focused on massive success, and I definitely think that. Now, in your book, you talk a lot about mindset, which is what we're talking about right now, and how critical it is, especially really in cybersecurity as well. If we want to dovetail that into the conversation, how do you fix a mindset to create vulnerabilities, and how do you fix a mindset to deal with growth, and how do you fix your mindset so that you can really handle these adaptive changes that happen in life and business?
I think the person has to believe that they're not just hardwired, that is a fixed mindset. A lot of people will say, that's just who I am. That's just the way I am. And when they say that, and again, that's their story they tell themselves,
Mm.
they're not amenable to change. If you say, I believe I can learn new things, maybe this pattern of behavior is not serving me, so
Mhm.
should change it, then that is a growth mindset, because growth mindset, we believe our brain is malleable. We can learn new things. It's not hardwired. So unfortunately, this goes back to the kind of victim conversation. A lot of people are not ready to change their mindset. They're trapped in that fixed mindset, and they think, well, this is just who I am. I had a guy that worked for me once, and he wanted to be a leader in my company. This was my first business, and he had a fixed mindset. So I told him once, I said, I need you to do this, this, and this, and have these behaviors. And he had massive resistance towards it. He said, so you're asking me to change who I am? And I said, yes, because who you are will not work in the position you want. So he tooth and nail fought um, that growth, because he wanted to cling on to this fixed mindset and his ego driven, because he didn't want anybody to say he's not good enough. I mean, he's good enough for the role he was in, but not the role he wanted. And he ended up leaving the organization because of that.
Yeah, the fixed mindset's a very hard thing. I think in your book, The Smartest Person in the Room, you wrote, the story we tell ourselves is the most important story we will ever hear. You have to be willing to rewrite it when it no longer serves you. And I think a lot of people don't realize that you aren't hardwired, like we mentioned. You are malleable. And being malleable in the way you define yourself is actually a virtue. It's not a fault. Because as you said, the idea of if I want to become the person I need to be, I have to stop being the person that I am. And that is a big change that people have to go through in order to hit the goals that they need to get to.
It's a change. I think people need to ask themselves, do I want to get the same results over and over and over? And if those results are not getting you where you want to go, then you need to change that story. I witness people that have relationships where they date the same type of person over and over and over, and they expect a different result. And I'm like, why don't you take some time off from dating and do the work on yourself and figure out exactly what you want to attract and become the person that would attract that. And then you would not keep having these problems. And most people don't want to do that work, though. It's a lot of self-reflection, a lot of vulnerability, and a lot of work. But again, you could cut an hour out of the TV a day, or get up 30 minutes earlier and make those small changes with this, and it would really drastically improve your life.
Absolutely. There's a lady in our ecosystem. Her name's Catherine Martin Fisher. And when she first came in our ecosystem, she's of, later in life. And she said, I'm not good on a computer. I'm not good on a computer. I'm not good with technology. She didn't have a mouse. She had one computer screen. It was always a big threat when you're like, we got to do something technology wise. And what she did is she really worked hard to change that internal narrative to say, I am a technical wizard. I am somebody who's going to dominate this space. I am somebody's going to come to me and ask me about technology, and I'm going to help them. And right now she's leading a lot of these technology journeys for people who are having difficulties with technology, and she's helping them overcome, just like what she did. And so now she's completely flipped the script, and she's a technology wizard. And I find that so incredibly motivating when you see that, because I hear sometimes people say, I'm not good at math, or no, I could never, I'm not good at my diet. And it's like, well, you're not, because you told me that. You've just sold me that idea.
Right.
Why don't you sell me, just change the product? You're good at selling things. You sold me you're not good at math. Why don't you change the product and be good at math? Sell me that product. It's a way better one.
Yeah, I used to hear that a lot with my first company, and that's why I wrote the book. It was targeted towards high IQ individuals that are lacking EQ skills, and I would constantly hear people say, "I'm just not good with people," and my response would be, "Well, what would happen to your life if you became great with people? What would happen to your relationship? What would happen to your career?" And then they start thinking about like, "Oh, maybe I should make this change. Maybe I should change my story." And a lot of the reasons to change a story is to paint a compelling future. And that often drives a change in the story.
Well, and that people use that a lot for when they talk about investments, and you get that person out of, I'm going to go out and buy my next Big Mac and stupid car that costs way too much money, to I'm actually going to invest in real estate or invest in a business or that sort of thing. It's really where you invest or reinvest. And I think on a podcast episode, you said, I didn't get here by keeping my profits or knowledge to myself. Reinvestment, whether financial or personal, is essential for exponential growth. And what I look at that when I think of her or the other person that you're talking about is the idea that they were willing to reinvest into themselves and really look to that exponential growth. Now, I know for you mentioned briefly how you had the prior cybersecurity company, then you moved into some other things like real estate and that sort of thing, and then you bounced back into the business space and reinvest in the business. What caused that little bit of a dabble, and then what caused back to sort of come back full force into the cybersecurity space?
When I left the parent company, I did have some money from the exit, and I wanted to invest in real estate. I took this 6-month long real estate investment course, and I got a little bit brainwashed. So I did become a real estate professional, and I did these cost segregation studies. I invested in short-term and long-term rental properties, and it was a distraction, to be honest. If I had not done that and taken all that money and put it in my company, I would be much further along, because the bottom line is I had told myself I was burned out with cybersecurity. I wanted to do something else, that all these people with a lot of money are in real estate, so that's maybe what I should do. The reality is, though, I have a lot to learn in real estate. I can't learn it all in 6 months. I have 30 years experience in cybersecurity, 6 years experience building a cybersecurity business. So the better decision would have been to leverage all of my experience and my capital and put it into a new business that can take advantage of the experience, rather than going into a brand new market, a brand new industry where I think I'm smart, but I have a lot to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, pivots are one thing, and completely reinventing is another. And I think the idea that you had all of this built up skill and it was under leveraged, you couldn't pull onto that as you jumped into real estate. I'm sure there's some crossover from leadership styles or from analytical styles when you're looking at, cap rates or building up a property management team. I mean, these are things that are transferable skills, but there's a unique value proposition that comes out of working in that cybersecurity. I mean, you sold your business to Alpine Security, to that company, and you founded the Blue Growth Cyber. What lessons did you learn from that? Like, you had your previous venture, you reinvested into this one out of the real estate. What was the biggest thing that you learned out of that process?
One of the biggest things I learned is I need to capitalize on what I know in order to get to the next level. So real estate, like I said, was a distraction. Cybersecurity, I did do medical device cybersecurity with Alpine Security. We did try to niche down before I sold it. And I knew that market. I know it's a growing market. It's a market I'm passionate with. So I just decided to step into that and own that and go for it. So being able to leverage the things I learned in a smart way, I think is what I needed to do. But I also had people telling me like, look, Christian, what are you doing with this real estate stuff? You've got all this experience in cybersecurity. You've got experience with medical device cybersecurity. Why don't you leverage that? That would be the smarter thing to do. And you will be much further along, much quicker than you were with your first company. And even in a year and a half with Blue Goat Cyber, our revenue is probably double what it was after 6 years with my first cybersecurity company.
Yeah, you basically played the game of being beta and then being VHS and came in and as the second to market on that one. In your book, The Smartest Person in the Room, you said, in cybersecurity, staying ahead isn't just about technology. It's about reinvesting in people, learning, and innovation. Threats will always evolve, so we have to evolve faster. If you could go back and give yourself pre-blood clot self advice based on this thought process, what would it be and why?
It would be to shift my mindset earlier. My mindset earlier was it's me against the world and I'm going to try to prove something to everybody. It'd be to shift that sooner to I'm part of the world. In collaboration and better teamwork, we can go much further versus me trying to prove something to everybody. I would have made that shift, which required me to develop better people skills and better emotional intelligence.
Emotional IQ is one of those things that I think people put to the side, and I think it's one of the most important things. You talk about real estate. I always tell real estate agents, that is probably the most important. Knowing, what 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms means is, that's pretty self-evident. But being able to help somebody through a divorce, being able to help somebody through a downsize, being able to help somebody through their first home, there's an emotional IQ that's tied to that. And success comes from really having that strong emotional IQ.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Christian, my man, we barely scratched the surface of talking about cybersecurity and medical equipment, but man, did we ever do a good deep dive into what it takes to make really good decisions, to really take control of your life, to take agency over the decisions and really own everything around you, to really not have that victim mindset, but really be able to create the outcomes both in the short and long term to create that sense of fulfillment. So you've done a great job in really building that out, and especially in that smartest person in the room. I think that's just such a great way for people to really dive into your content there.
Well, thank you, Steve. Enjoyed our conversation here.
Thanks, man. And guys, I would reach out to Christian. He's got a great business there, bluegoatcyber.com. Check him out there. And Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure you having on the podcast. And guys, this is the money, this is the mindset, this is the mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.